Good morning, everyone. This is Sarah Holland from the Office of Child Development and Early Learning. If I haven't had a chance to meet you yet, welcome and thanks so much for joining our kickoff for our Family Survey Fiscal Year 1920. Woohoo! We have you all muted, so I couldn't hear all of your applause that I'm sure that you are participating in at the moment. But thank you so much for joining. A couple little housekeeping details before we get started. One, if you didn't already hear our message, if you could please sign in just using your name and your program, that would be fantastic. It just helps us keep track of who's here. We also want to let you know that we have muted everyone and you are not able to unmute on your own. However, if you have a question or a comment, please feel free to use the chat box. Mary, my partner here today, is going to be monitoring that. So question, comment, concern, please feel free to use the chat box. Also, to let you know, we are recording this webinar today and it will be available, and I'll tell you a little bit about that later. So let's go ahead and get started. Our agenda for today, in just a minute, we're going to have some opening remarks from Deb Knoll with the Bureau. We're going to talk a little bit today about what's new with the Family Survey for fiscal year 1920. We're going to talk a little bit about logistics of the dissemination, some materials that have been developed to help support the dissemination of the survey, and we'll have a little bit of time for questions and answers, which again, we'll use the chat box for. So I'm going to turn it over to Deb. Deb, you should be unmuted.
Okay, thanks. Can you hear me, Sarah? Sarah, can you hear me? Hi, Sarah, can you hear me?
Deb, you might be muted on your phone. We can hear that. We can see that you're trying to say something. So go ahead and check in and check your phone. Oh, Janet can hear Deb. It's just me.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Everyone can hear Deb but me.
Okay, everyone can hear me. Oh, that's too bad.
Let me quick check. Say hi again.
Good morning.
Oh, I apologize. This is Mary. That was so me, and I'm sure you're saying great, great things.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, everyone could hear you but me. I'm very sorry.
So you can hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, great. So let me go ahead and give some opening remarks. Good morning, everyone. As Sarah said, this is Deb Knoll from the Bureau of Early Intervention Services and Family Support. Carl Beck, our Bureau Director, asked me to share some opening remarks. He had a schedule conflict and sends his regrets that he couldn't be with us this morning. The Bureau views the Family Survey as critical to our statewide early intervention system. We know that the process and procedures that we do every day work best when our families are engaged and working alongside of us in everything that we do. So we value that. We know it's important to ask families how we are doing. We've, over the past several years, incorporated Family Survey results in our verification process. We've incorporated them into the determination process for the past 2 years. So we really do value families' input on a once-a-year basis. We also ask families questions, very targeted questions when we come on site and do verification. And it's part of the verification process, and we incorporate their responses right into the report. Last week, all our programs received the 2020 determination summary. And we use, again, for the second year, specific questions from the family survey throughout the determination. And as you know, as a leader, every program is evaluated on the return rate for the survey. What you may not know that this year, the 2020 determinations, we gave everyone the point for the return rate since very few programs met the criteria that we have established for return rate. We knew at the Bureau that the survey was being updated and the distribution process was being revised, which is what you're going to hear about today. So we decided that every program would get a point for the return rate. We also are asking every program as part of your quality enhancement plan, part 1, to include your local program's strategies on distribution of the family survey, as well as your strategies to increase your local return rate with your families. We're really excited about the changes that have been made, and I think that all the stakeholder input over the past year to make the family survey the best is very exciting. We do have a leadership meeting this Friday, and we are going to be asking all the sites during the breakout to share your strategies and talk about that. You know your community, you know your family, you know your providers, and I'm sure that you guys are going to have great ideas to share with each other, especially since we do know that there are some programs that did exceed the criteria for the return rate. So definitely tapping into them and hearing how they did the family survey this past year. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Sarah to talk about the survey. So.
Great, thanks so much, Deb.
Thank you.
Well, yeah, so we'll first start talking about what's new with the family survey. I think most of you have probably heard these updates either at regional leadership or the state ICC or some of the other work that we've been doing. But if not, if this is new to you, no worries. So what's new with the family survey this year is we will have a new survey. It was developed with extensive stakeholder input. As Deb had mentioned, it was about a little bit more than a year-long process that we used to sort of get to this place of having a new survey. We are going to preview that with you today. As we were working on developing this new survey, one of the things that we made sure was that it was aligned with the also new Pennsylvania Family Engagement Birth Through College Career Community Ready Framework. If you're not terribly familiar with that, it did go out in the PAE News, an announcement about that. I'm also going to be doing a session coming up at EI Leadership. You can certainly email me. I can tell you a little bit more about that if you were interested. But we wanted to make sure that the questions that we were asking families in our early intervention program were aligned with this framework. So it's another piece that we built in. You will be very excited to hear, I'm sure, that we reduced the survey items by half. So we had close to 40 items. I think it was 30-some-ish. We're now at 20. So that's exciting. And our online survey, we now have a welcome page and also a thank you page. So without further ado, Mary's going to switch from our PowerPoint to go into SurveyMonkey, which is the platform that we will be using. Just like last year, our survey is an electronic survey. So when families click on the survey link or use the QR code, this is what they will see. This is the English version. It's also available in Spanish. So folks know the English version and Spanish versions are separate links with 2 different QR codes. So we will have materials both in English and in Spanish that we will be sharing. A little bit more about that soon. But this is the welcome page. It's important for you to know the instructions that we tell families as they're filling it out so that you can also support that. So we want families to know that their responses will help guide efforts at the statewide and local levels. So that's important. We want folks to know that as they're filling out this survey, that it's looked at by a lot of different people, both at the state and at your local level. As you can see, we tell people to answer each question independently, not sort of as a group. We also have a statement about understanding that families may experience a variety of different people in early intervention, but we ask them to consider their experiences as a whole as they're answering questions. Again, letting families know their responses are confidential and that programs will not be able to identify their responses within summary reports. That's an important piece to share with families. You can scroll down a little bit. It's also important that as you're helping to promote the survey to let families know that if there are any items that are not applicable to them, it wasn't an experience that they had or that they needed, they don't feel that question is important to them, they are asked to skip that item. Skip questions do not negatively impact program results or the results of the survey. So that is the best way for families to sort of say that this particular item wasn't important or wasn't applicable to them. We have a set of questions that are demographic in nature, and Mary's going to go and just throw some data in there. She was not born in 2014. These questions are required, and these are the items that we help that helps us determine sort of where families are coming from. Race and ethnicity section is not required. You can keep scrolling. And then you get to our questions. So questions are grouped just so that it's a little bit easier to go through. And Mary doesn't need to click on these sections because, again, families are able to skip questions. It doesn't impact their ability to continue through the survey. So we'll let you read some of those. The OSEP questions, the questions that we use to report to the Office of Special Educational Programs at the federal level, have not changed except with the exception of one. I'm going to see if I can find it. I didn't look at the first group, so sorry folks for the scrolling. So that is one that Mary is highlighting. Help me know about my child and family's rights. So that's one of the OSEP questions. Help me communicate. I believe that's one of them.
This one.
Yep.
Top one.
I think, and worked with my family to develop ideas and strategies to help my child learn. I believe that is the newly worded question. And that is reported just for infant toddler to the federal level. We ask it of everybody, but it only gets reported at the federal level for infants and toddlers. That is for preschool. What Mary is circling now, explain what options parents have if they disagree with a decision made by EI staff. That is the indicator that's reported for preschool. So you can see how questions are grouped. Likert scale is the same. I'm going from left to right, very strongly agree to very strongly disagree. Agree is in the middle. Again, if you have any questions or comments, feel free to use the chat box. So, Lauren, I see your question. I think I'll address that now just in case it gets lost in the chat. Certainly, I would check with your organization to see what their policy is around use of devices. I think that's important. However, from Opt-out's perspective, we encourage programs to think of ways that they can make it easier for families to respond to the survey. So using a tablet or a phone, ensuring that there is no identifiable information on it. So again, if you use your tablet to access Pelican or other spreadsheets or data that are sensitive, that should not be used. If families can access that information, you want to make sure that anything is closed. But utilizing a company or an organization iPad, something like that, is a strategy that you could consider.
Sarah, there's another question in the chat box too that says, if a family can't remember if something was discussed with them, would you suggest that the parent skip the question?
That is a very good question. I think that families should skip questions that they feel are not applicable. So in other words, these really are questions that are meant to be answered from the family's perspective. They're not compliance type questions of, did you get A, B, or C? So I would suggest, to answer that question more fully, I would suggest that families only skip questions that they feel are not applicable. So for example, if a family doesn't remember whether or not they got, the problem solving EI brochure or information about their rights, they should only skip that question if it wasn't important to them. So hopefully that answers that.
Or perhaps, Sarah, we've got a question that's up on the survey right now. Developed a transition plan based on my child and our family's strengths, needs, and concerns. If they're not at transition time, and then that question's not...
Might not be applicable.
Yeah, yep. That could be one that makes sense just for a family potentially to skip.
Yep.
There was one other question in the chat box as well, about the scale running in the opposite direction, left to right being agree to disagree than in previous surveys. And I'm about 90% sure we matched the same way as previous versions, but that's a good point. I'll double check that and see.
Yeah, and if it is different, we'll change it back to the way it was before.
But just to let you know, it's the same, the scale is used in the same way on all of the questions, so there's no trick to, now what you thought was agree is really disagree.
Yep. So we did have a request to read the questions. So a couple things. Thank you so much for using the chat. I don't want to lose the questions around distribution. So if you could hold on to your questions about distribution for a little bit, because we're going to get to that. But I see there's a few questions about when they should leave things blank. So yes, leave things blank if it is not applicable. The question is of why is there not an NA option? That's sort of one of the survey, experts have that we consulted with suggested that we not have a not applicable, that having families skip questions that are not appropriate for them is a better way to gauge data.
And again, I think you said earlier, Sarah, if a family skipped a particular question, it's not included in a program's local data.
Right. It's not hurtful to a program's data. It doesn't count against you, for lack of a better word.
Right.
It's null. It's not included in that percent.
So sort of the denominator shifts for that particular question. Yep. And it's only 100 instead of 101 people answered it. Okay. We're getting lots of comments in the chat box that I'll let you guys open and read about the NA with transition. And again, as Sarah said, yeah, that is something maybe we could take a look at in the future, as we always kind of analyze data on an ongoing basis. But what we know from other states' experiences and the national experts who have helped with the survey, that a better strategy is to just ask families to skip it if they don't think it applies to them at all.
We really are trying to, and a little bit more of the psychology of that, we want families to answer the question. And we don't want families to skip a question because they feel like they can't agree with it. Sometimes families, particularly families that are receiving services such as early intervention, can be uncomfortable with disagreeing with things sometimes. So giving people an option to skip things that aren't applicable helps sort of drive people to actually answer the question, but they still have that option. If it really isn't important to them, or it wasn't something that would affect them at that time. The opening letter does tell families to skip. Yes, it does.
And what you should see on your screen right now is that the survey itself reminds them again one more time, please skip the items that aren't applicable. That again, if you were, for example, developing talking points for a service coordinator who might be telling a family about the survey and you are concerned about that, that could be a piece that's potentially added on as a reminder.
Question about a neutral option. Again, the survey says experts have in all honesty said that when we have a Likert scale like we have, they have found that the agree, which is the middle button, is kind of the we count that as as part of our agreement. In all honesty, for most families, like that agree is a fairly neutral statement. So that's one reason why we don't have a neutral option.
Should we take a look at the thank you? Or do you want to look at any more questions?
So, yeah, I think you can scroll through. One of the new questions is around use of home language and preferred communication methods. We also had a new question around help me to incorporate cultural values and practices to help my child learn. Had ongoing and open communication with my family. It's another new question. One that we saved from the old survey that folks really liked were the were honest with me, even if they had difficult things to discuss. We also have a question that gets to families' thoughts about where their children's services are held. So help me to support my child in typical places with children of the same age. Some questions around assistance with resources. So provided me with resources to further my knowledge of my child's unique needs.
Maybe we'll keep on reading these just for folks who don't have a screen up and can
Sure.
see it. And I'll go back and make sure we catch the other ones.
Helped me to, can you go back?
Yep, there we go.
Helped me to connect with other programs and or non-EI services that met our family's needs, interests, and goals.
Our next question that's here is encouraged me to connect with other families, for example, by connecting me to Parent of Pennsylvania, Parent and Training and Information Centers, Family Centers.
Shared information with me about family leadership opportunities. Told me about opportunities to be involved in improving the local early intervention program. Developed a transition plan based on my child and our family's strengths, needs, and concerns. Helped me to address concerns and problem solve during the transition process.
Quick run up to the top so we can make sure people who are just on the phone know what these questions are as well. So the first question that families will be asked after the demographic pieces is, in the past year, early intervention staff, which is sort of the pre-part of all of the questions, worked with my family to develop ideas and strategies to help my child learn. And that is a question the infant toddler program reports to OSEP.
Supported my child as the first teacher. Supported my family as the first teacher for my child. Helped my child to build relationships with other children and adults. Helped me to communicate more effectively with people who work with my child and family. Helped me know about my child and family's rights concerning early intervention services, such as filing a complaint, requesting mediation, due process.
And those last two are the other two questions that are reported to the Office of Special Education Programs for the infant toddler folks.
Explain what options parents have if they disagree with the decision made by EI staff. Use my home language and preferred communication methods. Helped me to incorporate my cultural values and practices to help my child learn. Made me feel part of the IFSP, IEP decision-making process. Built on my child's strengths and interests. Had ongoing and open communication with my family. And I think we read the rest of them. Just a couple points about sort of how we came up with these items. So some of these items we did move forward from the old survey. A couple things about the old survey. The old survey was something that Pennsylvania did develop quite some time ago. Many of those items from the old survey, as well as when we went through that process, were pulled over from a national survey that was developed through a university. They had thousands of families weigh in on those items. And then when we developed the survey, we also had a significant amount of family input with the old survey. We had the same, very similar process with the new survey. We did not have thousands of people, although hundreds of people, look at the surveys and provide us comment. We certainly will analyze the results, and if we're seeing that things, that we're getting different results than we did before, or if the data is indicating that there's an issue with items, or perhaps different families in different parts of the state are not sort of looking at the items in the same way, we can sort of pull some of those indicators through some additional data analysis. So since this is a new survey, we will certainly be looking at those things very carefully. So I do want to keep an eye on time. I want to make sure that we get to dissemination, but we want to show you what happens when families are done with the survey. This is sort of a new part. So you can see that there is a little thank you, directs families to the Early Intervention Technical Assistance Portal, and also directs them to the RA account as well as a telephone number if they have comments that they want to send, or if they want somebody to help them address a concern. See, there's a question about, were families a part in developing the questions? Absolutely. Families were our bookends and all through the process. So we actually did work with families to begin with before we got input from other folks. And then at the end, as we got to a final draft, families were part of the process of reviewing that. So yes, thanks so much for that question. So we're going to go back to our PowerPoint. To our next slide. Around some logistics about this survey. So this year, local early intervention programs are in the driver's seat 100%. So to be clear about that, OCDEL will not be sending out any direct communication to families this year. Last year we did. We will not be doing that this year. The survey window will be open from February 1st, which is coming soon, all the way through June. So through the end of June. And that was a response to some EI programs that had noted to us that they often have touch points with families before the summer, and they thought that that would be a good way to get families' input. So we had originally thought we would close the survey window in May. We've extended that through the end of June. So your target respondents are families who are active in receiving some type of service on February 1st. So that's your targeted respondents. We are not going to be sending you a list of those targeted respondents. We do understand that as you're disseminating the survey link and the QR code, there may be families that respond to the survey that came in March or April or May. That is okay. You don't need to worry about that, but when you think of who your push is, who you're really trying to get to, respond to the survey, it would be families that are active starting February 1st.
So Sarah, we had a couple questions come in through the chat box about some logistical kinds of things.
Yep.
One is for those who don't speak English or Spanish, because we have the link.
You go to the next slide.
Oh,
no, one more back. Couple more.
Oh, perfect.
So I'm going to get to the English-Spanish question. That answer is yes. So just a couple other little pieces. So reports will be provided to assist the local programs to monitor their returns. So OCDEL will be sending out information to programs on April 1st, May 1st, and June 1st. If you don't see it on the exact 1st, look for it on the 2nd. But that is our goal, to send those reports out to both advisors, early intervention advisors, and programs on the 1st of April, May, and June. The data shared will include some basic demographics around gender, race, ethnicity, and disability type. So you will also be able to do some targeted recruitment. In case you have a demographic area that's not responding, if you have too many families of boys.
So people won't hear that the Smith family filled out the survey, but they'll know basic demographics, and if the demographics they're getting don't seem to match the kids in their program, they'll know who to then retarget for dissemination.
Exactly. Thank you. Okay. So I see a couple other questions. I'm going to get to this one other point, and then I'll loop back to some of our questions. So question around language translation. So the Connect line, the Connect helpline, which is up on the screen, the number is there, is available for families that either have questions about the survey. So, you know, if a family doesn't understand what a question means or what the survey is for, certainly if you were there, you can answer that. But the helpline is there for families. It is also available to provide language translation. Again, we do have the online version is available on English and Spanish. We do find that sometimes our Spanish-speaking families prefer to use the language translation service. That is perfectly fine. You can direct them to Connect. If a family through services utilizes an interpreter, it is okay if you utilize somebody that you already have at your program to do that translation. But as a support across the state, the Connect helpline is available to everybody. I want to make sure we go back to the question around who to survey. Yeah. So it's families that are receiving services on February 1st, which could mean that family came into service a year ago. Or it could mean they came into service January 31st. So if you have families that are receiving services on February 1st, that's who, sort of, for lack of a better word, our N will be. That's how we will determine our return rates. So it is similar to like the December 1 count. It'll be the February 1 count.
And Sarah, there's another question about the survey window, and maybe if you could review that again, because someone's saying, we don't do our home visits until August 18th and 19th. Is it possible to have the due date be in August?
So that at this time, we've determined that the survey will be open from February through the end of June. So you can start surveying folks. You can start surveying folks starting February 1st through the end of June.
And so it doesn't.
Some of it is reporting. We need to make sure that we have data in to report.
Mm-hmm. And so when the questioner talks about we don't do our home visits, it can be someone who is, your person who's talking to the family about the service doesn't have to always be a service coordinator or administrator.
Correct.
It could be someone who's out there on a weekly basis providing an early intervention therapy.
Correct. Yep. Yeah, it can be. Yeah, and I mean, we encourage you, and we're going to talk about that. We encourage you to really involve your partners in this process. So of course, that's service coordinators. It's therapists that are going into the home. Whoever has the most contact with families would probably be the folks who you want to identify and make sure that they are supporting your program in this effort. So,
Emily Hackelman weighed in the chat box talking about one way to think about this is not that we're not pulling an active list on February 1st and sending that out to everybody. And so we're not sending the survey on February 1st, but we're looking to really engage with families in that window to get their participation, request their participation, their feedback about their early intervention experience.
Exactly.
So think of it as not a send date for a survey as much as it is a window where we want to engage families, get them to participate, and be involved in giving us their feedback. And again, as Sarah said, it could be, if this, closer to June feels more like summertime to you, it doesn't, again, have to be an administrator or a service coordinator. It could be the lead teacher on providing supports to that child over the summer. That's one way to just kind of think about it.
Yeah, so again, we will be using the February 1 active participants as our N. And by our N, I mean that will be our survey pool. Your return rate will be based upon that. We understand that as you're engaging families, there may be families, and most likely will be families, that come in after February 1st that respond to the survey. That is fine. We just want to make sure that we're transparent in terms of how we are going to be determining your return rate. So again, we don't expect you as a therapist or as a program person to sort of be constantly thinking in your head, should I give this family this information?
And there's a couple other questions in the chat box about are we looking, does it matter how long families have been in service? And coming from my echo head, I think we've drilled in that has to be 6 months of service, and that's not what we're talking about with a family survey. Any family who's touching early intervention in this window of time, we want to know how well things have gone so far, whether it's just been that they're been through the evaluation and the IFSP process, or if they have been involved in early intervention services for several years.
Yep.
So we're really throwing out any kind of 6 months, this many months, this time frame. If you're interacting with a family in that window, they're in early intervention, how are things been going?
So I know that sounds a little bit complicated, but yes. So families that respond between the 1st of February and the end of June will be counted. You will receive all of that data. The only thing that February 1st date has to do with is the denominator in the N. So that's how your return rate is being determined. Yep. Having said that, again, you will get responses of everybody that responds to the survey, all those families. If a family comes in on February 1st, you can feel free to share with them that information about early intervention survey.
Another question just came through, Sarah, about is there a question about how long the child has been in service?
No, there is not that question. Because we have some other demographic information, if we wanted to, we might be able to sort of determine, do families that are in early intervention longer than others answer the survey differently. We've done some of that data analysis before, and we didn't really see statistically significant differences in terms of how long families were in EI. That's a good question. Thank you. Yep. Let's go to the next slide. So some questions, a lot of questions. We've already started receiving questions, which is very exciting to me, about what materials you're going to get to help support the dissemination of this information about the survey. What you can see on your screen is sort of the information that's going to be provided to you. And it's going to be provided in 3 different formats, for lack of a better word. There will be a flyer that is on a regular size sheet of paper that you can print out. There's This information is formatted also in a postcard format and also as a social media post, which is, it's basically just a picture. So you can use that picture like I did in a PowerPoint. You can print that picture out. If you or your LICC has a Facebook group or something like that, you can post it on social media. You can send it out through Twitter. So you will have that as well. We will be sending this information. It will come through Octel's Early Intervention RA account, so look for that. We will be sending that out via email to EI program leaders on the 31st, which is Friday. The survey will open February 1st, which is Saturday. We ask that you not provide the information to families before February 1st because they won't be able to access it. If you happen to see a family on Friday, you can feel free to give them the postcard. Just make sure you let them know the survey's not available till tomorrow. So that's why we're giving you the materials sort of at a time where you should feel pretty free to start sending them out as soon as you get them. But again, if they happen to get in a family's hand on the 31st, let them know that the survey will be open the next day. I think that's all. So here's just a couple tips around helping to support your dissemination process. Oh, you know what? I have one more thing. You don't need to flip back though. Okay. One more note around materials. We also did have several requests last year for a paper survey. You will be getting a electronic copy of a paper survey that you can print out. However, we are strongly encouraging you to only use that if the family requests a paper survey because they don't have electronic access, either through a support that you can provide as a program or through their own links. We encourage you to be creative while respecting confidentiality and ensuring that any devices that you're using that are shared devices don't have any personal identifiable information on them that families could access accidentally. But we're asking that if you use the paper survey, Octel has agreed this year that we will enter that survey into the SurveyMonkey. So paper surveys can be returned to us. But again, we caution you and ask you not to just print out paper surveys and give them to all your families. That only use the paper survey for families that need it. In addition to getting sent over email, the email will also designate how you can find these materials on DocuShare. So they'll be sent to you on an email, and then also they will be stored in DocuShare. And the email that you will get on Friday will tell you that. So a little bit of tips and tricks about how to implement the survey to ensure success. We want you to make sure that you enlist support. So again, as I had said, think about who the folks are that are surrounding this family, that this family has the closest ties to. That could be a service coordinator. It could be a therapist. It could be a teacher. It could be their childcare program. So again, how the survey gets to a family, the best thing is for families to get it and get information about it multiple times in multiple ways. So we really encourage you to enlist support of your supporters to be part of your dissemination team. Again, you can refer them to this webinar. You can give them the materials so they can help send it out. We want to make sure that we're using clear messaging, particularly around how the survey is used. So we want to make sure that as you're handing out the survey at your local level, that families know what you're going to do at the local level. That's going to be most important to them. that they know that somebody from their local program is going to be reviewing these results. If you have stories or ways that you've used your family survey results in the past, that would be another part that would be good to use in your messaging. Share often. Share early and share often. So again, survey window opens on February 1st. Start sharing then, and continue to share through the end of June. I do see there's a couple questions. I'm going to get to them in a second. So we want to support families, but allow families space to ensure their confidentiality. So we know that there are some families that may need some additional support in responding to the survey. We may have families that may have lower literacy levels. We may have families that, for a wide variety of reasons, may struggle with reading, may need language interpretation. We ask you to use your best judgment by certainly helping them. You can absolutely utilize Connect, but we also know that sometimes folks that are working with families have developed a relationship with them that makes families feel comfortable with them. But we also want to make sure that we are providing families space. So you want to make sure, particularly if you're doing a type of thing where maybe you're reading the questions to the family, that you are not looking at their responses, that you let families know that the responses are confidential, that you're not going to see their responses. So we really do need to make sure that we support families but allow them space. We really want families to feel comfortable responding to the questions in the way that really is authentic to them. So certainly, if utilizing the Connect helpline to have questions read to families, if that feels more comfortable for the family, that is absolutely an option. We want folks to be familiar with the instructions. We had lots of conversation around the skip the item instruction. That would be an important instruction for families. Some of the questions that we do get on Connect a lot is, again, what is this survey for? So make sure that's part of your messaging. The other question that we often get is, I have this person and this person and this person that I work with, and I'm not sure how to respond to this question because I've had different experiences with different people. That's when we tell people we're asking them to look at their early intervention experience as a whole. Not as one individual, but their early intervention experience as a whole if they're working with numerous people. And again, anticipate families' needs. So you know your families best. So if you know that you are in an area that lots of families don't have access to a desktop computer, or families aren't using tablets or smartphones, let them know. This SurveyMonkey is designed that it does work beautifully with smartphones. So even if families don't have a desktop computer or don't have a tablet, if they have smartphones with data, even if they don't have Wi-Fi, they should be able to answer the survey. We do have the paper survey as a backup, last resort. But we want you to sort of think about what are the needs of your families.
So Lauren weighed in with a question around parents and should we read it to them if they're not able to read well, and I think you've answered that one. So Lauren, if you have other details, please weigh in the chat box one more time if we didn't answer that question well enough for you. There was another question about how will Ocdel know if someone who responded to the survey was active on February 1st? Is there something in the survey to identify them? And one of the things, so when we start pulling and analyzing all this data, we don't need to have that exact match between the count of the kids in your program on the February 1st and then the respondents, but we're looking for an approximate number of families for whom we could expect a response during this open window we have for the survey. So it's okay if a family wasn't counted on February 1st, but sometime in that window is active and responds by the end of that fiscal year, the end of June.
Yep.
There's a question here about what's your suggestion for explaining the purpose of the survey to families?
Yeah, so in the beginning of the instructions, we talk about how this survey is used at both the state and local levels to gauge some feedback from families around their experiences in early intervention. So again, at the local level, if your local interagency coordinating council or your service coordination entity reviews the results of the survey and thinks about ways that they can improve the quality of early intervention services in your area, that's what you should share with families. That we look at this at the local level, we look for areas that we are doing strong in, so we make sure we continue to use those practices, and we look in areas where we may not be as strong, so we can think of new strategies we can use with families. We want families to know that these results are looked at and they're used to help drive program improvement. So that's the snapshot.
Yeah.
But really, the more specific you can get about what you're doing in your local area, the better.
So maybe a story then, Sarah, if you had an example of, boy, you know, and a couple years ago we saw this on the survey and we made this change because parents were telling it, might be something that helps.
Yep. We can go to the next slide. We're getting really short on time.
Yeah.
I do see a couple questions, so we'll get to those. So here's a few don'ts, which is going to be hard to do. We don't want to pressure families to fill out the survey. We don't want to become, not to pick on used car salesmen, I know a few and they're very, very lovely people, but we don't want to sort of become that stereotypical pushy person. So we want to make sure that families hear about the survey a lot, but we don't want to put sort of high pressure stakes on families, like we need you to answer this survey or else we'll be rated badly. You know, we don't want to do that to families. We want you to support families, but that's not the same as taking the lead. We want you to take the lead on dissemination, so be clear about that. But we don't want you to take the lead on answering the questions for families. We don't want you to be too involved with families. So if you think about it in terms of, you know, some of our work around inclusive practices and supporting families through interventions, you want to intervene at the lowest level that you have to. You don't want to intervene too much, and you don't want to intervene too little. So if you know a family struggles with reading, you know, you probably don't just want to hand them the postcard and say, fill this out. You might want to suggest to them that there is a helpline that you can use that can read the questions to you. So again, we want you to anticipate what families' needs are, but we don't want you to sort of direct the support. You can give suggestions, you can, again, be a support, but we don't want you to take the lead on filling out the survey. And we don't want you to use language that creates sort of distance from the survey. So again, language like, you know, we have to do this for the state, or we have to report this data to the feds, can sound very disconnected for many of our families in early intervention. It's certainly appropriate to tell folks that the data is looked at both the statewide and federal level to help drive program improvement efforts. That's appropriate. But what really will create a connection with families, even more so than that, is for you to talk to them about how you use it at the local level. That's where families are having their experiences. That's what they care about most.
And that probably goes through to one question about sending talking points about discussing the survey. It's really a local sort of issue. You've got basic directions, but it's probably more key to share local success stories with using it.
Yeah, and questions about the PowerPoint. So we are recording this, so you will be able to access this later. So there's that. I can ask our DocuShare experts, which I am not, if we could upload this PowerPoint to the DocuShare where the other materials are. I would be more than happy to do that, and that has some talking points on it so that then you could add your own.
The webinar will also be shared on the EITA portal.
Yes.
And so there's the recording that we're making right now as we have this discussion will be posted on the portal, and you'll get additional information about exactly where in an upcoming email.
So I am looking at our time, and we are going to sort of officially close the webinar. However, if Mary and I can stay on for a little bit longer, if there is a question that you didn't ask, we can stay on for a couple more minutes to be able to respond to those questions. You can feel free to use the chat. So we will leave the webinar open for a little bit, but we will close our sort of formal comments. And thank you so much. Stay tuned for information about materials that you can use. And we look forward to a successful survey season. Thanks.
So Sarah, I'm going to keep going through the questions. For those of you who are hanging on and have a particular question, we'll get right to them. So there's a question about, is there a section at the bottom of the survey that allows them to give specific comments or suggestions for the program?
So there is not. However, the closing page does have an RA account and a telephone number for Octal where they are invited to send comments or concerns to that place. And
the next question is from Kelly, who asked, will we somehow have to report our February 1st count of active kids to Octal, or will Octal have the number? And the response from Emily is that we'll be running the report, and so your local program doesn't need to do anything. Octal will be able to get that information. But please remember that you're not going to have a list of specific children from Octal. It's all of the kids who you want to have contact with, the families who have kids enrolled in that window that we're looking at, so that you can get their input. So there's not going to be a list, but Octal will be able to pull that information out of Pelican. And then, Sarah, another question. Will jointer counties be able to see the family survey results specific to their own county or still be combined?
We can probably look into that. I mean, I think up to this point, we shared data by jointer, I believe.
But we are collecting, I'm thinking out loud here. So Sarah, the first answer to this question is, good question.
Yeah.
Let's find out.
Yeah.
But I'm thinking that since we could collect, we are asking by county, like I'm going to pick on Cumberland Perry, we could combine just the two results, but still have that data identified as this in particular came from Perry versus Dauphin County or Cumberland County.
Yeah.
We'll look into it. Good idea.
We'll look into it. Yeah.
So another question about, can we use a report in the data warehouse to get that active count? And if Emily's still on the line and able to weigh in, I'm going to put a suggestion out and then see if there's any other response or not. We can make sure that's clarified in the email that's coming out to everybody. But I think it's really up to your local program to talk about who are the kids who are in service in that window of time that we have the survey open. And so what report you use that to get your active count, whether it's through who your service coordinators have in their caseloads or through that kind of count. Emily is weighing in here and saying that Octal will distribute the count of kids. That'll be the denominator, essentially, when we go to look at percentages, but you won't have a specific list identifying different kids and families. So there'll be a number, but not the count. So however you can get that information on kids who you have in service during that window of when we're looking at participating in the survey, that would be great.
And again, that information, so that's how we'll be determining those program reports that you'll get on April 1st, May 1st, and June 1st. We'll have that information. They'll have that denominator, for lack of a better word. So, I mean, in essence, you probably don't need, we will be telling you that come April 1st, what that denominator is. Again, if you survey families that are receiving services from February 1st through June 30th, that's probably the best approach, and not to make it more complicated than it needs to be.
Right. So there really doesn't need to be just a whole lot of mailing at a local level. If you've got staff who are going out and having one-on-one contact with families, that's probably a way that ensures that gets right into the hands of the families that you want to disseminate the survey to.
Yep.
We're out of chat box questions, but maybe we'll give it another minute, see if anybody has other sort of burning issues or questions that they want to make sure we address. We've got another question, and again, Emily, hang on if you're still there. And the question is, if we're closing families this week, there's a 5-day window for completely closing in Pelican. Will they be counted in the active count? And that maybe if we, and the response we have is it's really, they'll be in the count, but again, we're looking for our best estimate of kids for the denominator on February 1st. And it's going to be rare that we ever are looking for, or that we're expecting to have 100% return rate from every one of your families. So it really is, look at those kids who you've got in that time window, and do your best to get out to those families and ask for their participation. Yeah.
So again, the denominator piece is just it is a way that's database that we can say, sort of on a typical day in early intervention, your program serves this many families. We know that families come and go. So there will be families that come in May and April and June that answer the survey that weren't in the February 1 count. And there may be a family that left in January 25th and you're not going to see them again, so they won't have access to the survey.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it would be remarkable if, and there's a question about this, it would be remarkable if you had a 100% return rate, but we certainly can do better than some of the return rates we've had in past years. We really, the point is not to hit a particular return rate, but the focus is really on ensuring that families are giving us feedback on their experiences about early intervention. And so we want to give all families the opportunity to share how they feel about what's been going on. And, there are going to be kids at that window of February 1st who come in and out so quick that you don't have time to talk to them about a family survey. Same at the end, towards June, and where we're not going to have that opportunity. But as much as possible, we want to be able to give all families the opportunity to share how they feel about early intervention.
Yeah. Correct.
So there's a question here about should the survey target families who have active IFSPs and tracking plans, not those who do not qualify?
And that is correct. So again, it's families receiving services. So not families that are not eligible.
Yeah.
Yeah, so families receiving services, yep.
Yeah, I think you're, there's another comment here about we can do better, and just wanted to make sure we don't get tripped out about actual numbers. You're right. We really want to make sure that we are getting as much feedback from families as possible. So think about how many families responded to your survey last year and your return rate, and think about strategies that would help you increase that in the coming year.
Yep.
We've had return rates between 15 to 20% over maybe the last 5 or 6 years. But Sarah and I just read something this morning that said that the national return rate for these family surveys in other states across the country averages at closer to 40%.
Yeah.
So we get some room.
Yeah.
So someone's weighing in with a question around, are we surveying families initially after the initial IFSP and I'm betting it's home visit probably wouldn't be best, or are we just someone looking for advice from other EI leaders if others have done this or waited for quarterly meetings with families? Sarah, any strategies you're thinking about?
Yeah, I think it is okay if you tell a family early on in the process that there is a family survey and we would love to get your feedback. Certainly suggesting to the family that you may, some of the questions are really about the services that you're going to be receiving. You might want to wait to respond to the survey till you've had a chance to experience services and then follow up. We want to provide you some flexibility around sort of how you distribute it. I don't think it hurts to tell families early on in the process about the family survey and encourage them to fill it out. But again, sort of prepping families that if they haven't actually started receiving services yet, it's going to be challenging for them to actually respond to the questions. So they may want to wait a few weeks until services start. And again, we absolutely encourage you to utilize your partners, utilize the therapists and other folks that are seeing the children. Certainly service coordinators or folks that have those touch points, those are excellent times to talk about the survey, and you absolutely should. But we encourage you to use other partners in that. And there was a question about tracking.
Right, there's a question about tracking, and no, we're not using the survey, we're not providing the survey to families who are only in tracking. It's kiddos in that window of time, again, who are active and eligible for early intervention service, active IFSP kids in that window of time.
I think the caveat, and I don't think this is called tracking, but for families that have been in early intervention services, but maybe are not receiving the whole level of services, those families you can survey. Again, if they were receiving services on February 1st, but
right.
in March,
right,
they
so,
weren't, you could absolutely survey them, but not for families that in our infant toddler program are on that, that tracking, because that's,
yeah, so a kid who
confused you.
If little Susie is in tracking on February 1st and stays in tracking all the way through the time period, never has a full IFS, never is eligible for a full IFSP and early intervention supports through the IFSP, that child wouldn't be someone we would survey. However, if Susie was in early intervention services and had an IFSP on February 1st and hung around with an IFSP till May and then went to tracking, you could still want to make sure that that family has an opportunity to talk about the supports that were provided through the IFSP.
Yeah.
Other questions? Or is everyone getting hungry?
As Deb had mentioned at the beginning of our call, for those of you that are still on, there is going to be some time dedicated at the regional meeting on Friday to talk about this a little bit more and to answer some other questions. So thank you so much for your engagement and for helping us have a successful survey season.